it's Tina Logassi here from Heirloom Designs, and today we're going to go further with the Belle Époque Bunny. So this is as far as we got last time. Today we're going to get to work on the clothing, which I'm super excited about. These are the fabrics I've decided to work with for this bunny. You have two options for the skirt. The one I'm going to go through first is the simple skirt, which is just basically has a gathered waist, and that's what I'm using this fabric for this. And I'm going to do the bloomers out of this cotton. And I found the difference for the bloomers. I can show you some examples because of course I've been playing a little bit. So on this bunny, I did the bloomers out of like a I think it's like a rayon or something. So it hangs differently. These you could design so that your bloomers actually sit up here, which we might do when we get to finishing off this one. But just keep in mind that your fabric is going to make things hang differently. Whereas the cotton, which is what I have for this one, you can see it here. Oh, a little bit of debris there. But you can see here, it's got a little bit more volume. It's not so saggy looking. And on this particular bunny, I like how they look up here. Not that anyone's really going to see them, but I like ending them there. So I'm going to be going longer with the leg first. That's why we don't do the leg and the hand fur yet, because you want to see how your outfit's coming along. So right now, the first thing you want to do is start with the bloomers, because that needs to go onto the body before you can put the shoes on. So for the bloomers, you're going to have your pieces. You're going to have to tape together the upper and bottom and lower for the front and the back of the bloomers. So once you do that and tape them together, okay, so you're going to double over your fabric. And if you're using a fabric that's got any sort of a stretch, you're going to want to pay attention to that and make sure that the stretch is going this way, so it's around the body. But I prefer with the bloomers, and pretty much with all of the pattern pieces, to work with no stretch in my fabric. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cut these pieces all around the outside lines. Okay, and with this one, you do have some markings to transfer over for the dart. And carry that point down onto both sides. Mark these corners. Okay, so, and I just know that these are my rear because they've got the dart in them, and these are my fronts. So for both of these, I'm going to start by sewing the crotch line. So I've got my set of rear bloomers with the right sides together. So I'm just going to sew along there, and same with the front in the same spot. It's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and next I'm going to take the rear of the bloomers, and I'm going to take the two darts. And these need to get sewn at the machine. So I'm just going to fold them in half, matching up best as I can, those lines on either side, and I'm going to sew along there to make the darts. Okay, the next step here is to open the front and the back together and have the right sides facing, and we're going to just sew these inner seams. All right, so this is what you're left with, and the reason why I like to do it like that is because now I'm going to be adding some trim along these bottoms, and also put an elastic up at the top, and this is just the most efficient way I've found of being able to do that. So for the bottom, I might just use just a plain white there. And then afterwards, I will be adding in an elastic. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this over and sew it so that my raw edge is hidden. Okay, and then now I'm going to go back to the machine. And the next step is to sew my trim along that bottom edge. Okay, so this is the bottom of your bloomer. So you've got different things you can do with this. I mean, if you're planning on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put an elastic along the back here, and then these will end up being gathered down at the ankles. If you wanted a shorter bloomer, you could cut this pattern, part way up the leg and actually end it there, and then she'd have like little shorts. So there's a lot of things you can do with these patterns, just play around with them a bit. So the simplest is to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to take an elastic, and I'll take you over to the machine to see how, it's just to add a little bit of gather there. But I'm going to be feeding this under the machine and basically stretching this elastic as I sew to create those gathers. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I like to have it start a bit further than my actual fabric, and I'm just going to start sewing on it just to get me down. Then I'm gonna go back and forth a little bit, just this first 1/4 inch, because that's gonna end up in the seam anyways. And that's now giving me something to kind of grip onto at the back. And I'm gonna pull this tight. And while my machine is sewing, I'm also going to kind of help it. I'm not trying to push it forward, but I'm trying to help it at the back to feed, because I am pulling quite a bit on the front. So you have to kind of pull on the back the same amount so that your fabric doesn't go backwards. You're kind of fighting. You do have the feed dogs underneath to help move your fabric forward on a machine, but that will help. So I'm just finishing that off. So basically, this is just a really quick way. You know, if it's just an elastic for doll clothing, don't necessarily need to make a casing or anything. I mean, you could, but this will work for my purposes. Okay, so once you've got the lace on the lower part of the bloomers, you're going to come back here on the back side, and I'm just going to pick one outer leg seam to sew, because I want to do one outer leg seam, then I'm going to do the waist, and then we'll do the other outer leg seam. And there's a reason to my madness, so just follow along with me. So for this, I'm just going to so I'm going to match up those two end pieces like so, and I'm going to start sewing up at the top. So I'm just going to sew all along that leg. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to do this waist all at once, and I'm going to actually thread, because it's quite easy to do this. While I sew over my hem at the waist, I'm going to actually thread a piece of elastic in there. So I'm going to do this all at once and then sew along that bottom. If this feels too much for you, you can also just baste along this bottom first, then sew. You can also sew, then feed the elastic in afterwards. I'm just showing you kind of a quick way to do it. Just going to I'm going to have my elastic sticking out a little bit at the one end. And I fold this over and make sure that I've got enough overhang that I can sew, that I'm not going to catch that elastic when I'm sewing. Again, you can pre-baste this if you're more comfortable doing that, but you can feel where that elastic is and just keep yourself really at the edge. Okay, so then I have this ability to work with that elastic now up here. Okay, so then I'm going to cut the other end, and the next thing is to sew up this other side, but I'm going to pull on my elastic to get a bit of a gathered waist there. I'm just going to do it like that. So this is probably about 3¼ times 2. So this is probably about 6½ inches all the way around that you've gathered this to. So now when I go to sew up this side, I'm going to be sewing directly through that elastic. So I'm just going to right now hold it in place with the pin. And then just like on the other side, I'm going to match all of this down that leg. Okay, so the bloomers are done. So the one thing note is before you feed them onto the bunny, you can see how long these dowels are because I didn't cut them off before. But now before I try to feed this on, it's going to be very hard to get past the foot along with that long dowel. So I'm just going to flip these inside out so they're ready to go. And I'm actually just going to use my wire cutters to cut that dowel. So I was showing you before, this is where it's going to be sitting on. So they don't need to be any longer than about there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut those off. Make sure that your dowel was pushed all the way up, which mine was. And then you can just cut off that excess. I'm just using wire cutters here because it's quite soft wood. Alrighty, and so for the bloomers, before you put them on, and make sure that you've got the darts are on the back side. So I'm going to flip this over so that the darts are on the back. And to get them up past the toes, it gets a bit easier. I'm just going to pull them. Okay, and there we go. And then at this point, again, you can decide. The reason why you kind of want to decide how you want your bloomers to be hanging is it determines your leg fur, and that also, once you figure out your leg fur, then we're going to move on to doing the shoes. So I'm just going to see what this looks like. If I pull it up a little bit, I kind of do like that look on this one too. I really do like this, these cottons for the bloomers. So I do like that look very much. So right now my piece of leg fur is this long, and you're going to want it to go more than above that. So I would say, because I know my boots only come up to about there, I actually want to extend my leg fur for this particular version. So I'm going to add another half an inch should be good, just to play it safe, because I do want to make sure that her legs have fur going up just underneath where I want to end these. So I'm going to grab back my fur. All right, so I am actually going to go wider by, I think that's probably about a half an inch too. And I'm going to come up a half an inch. Yeah, this is very rough, but that won't matter. All right, so now I've got, yep, I've got just enough to come around there. So if you end up needing to do that, this piece I end up doing just over 3 inches tall, and it's about 2.5 inches around, and that's so that I can get up into that thigh. So we're gonna start again towards that bottom ankle. Don't need to go crazy with the glue. You're pretty much just holding this in place. Okay, and what I like to do is try to line it up along this seam here. So I'm gonna come close to the seam, and then I'm going to try to cut the mohair so that it ends up kind of nicely lining up against that seam. Don't obsess over this, because ultimately this shouldn't be seen. Okay, so there's that one. And then you can see now when it looks kind of funny, it looks like a leg warmer. But when we pull this down over top, all right, and you'll see when you've got your boot there, it just looks far more normal and regular to have that. So I will finish the other side up after. I want to get into showing you how to do the shoes. So because I've got these nice pinks and things I'm working with, I found, so I have leather scraps always flying around. I pick them up at thrift stores, and sometimes you can buy them on Marketplace. Sometimes I'll like the color on the backside better, so I'll end up with like a suede look, which is actually what I did with this bunny. That is actually the backside of a brown leather that I just really liked, how it was kind of a plum color. So I was looking at the white, but then I decided, okay, look at this. So that's probably supposed to be the correct side. I do not like it. But look how nice that gray is. And it's a nice thin leather, which will be very easy to sew through. So I'm going to work with this one. And keep that in mind. I tend to go for the thinner rather than thicker leathers because they're easier to sew through. I like just using a needle and thread. If I have to, I'll pull out a hand leather needle, but you should be able to get a thin enough leather that's got a nice supple, that it's not too hard to push through. Okay, so I've got my pattern pieces. Also, if you can get a hold of any leather scraps or anything, you could totally use a nice quality felt in exchange. You just don't want to use anything that can fray, and something with a little bit of structure to it is really helpful. I just like to pin those in place, and I'm going to go around and cut out each of my pattern pieces. And you want 2 of everything because you are making 2 boots. And I do want to show you how to work with these boot soles. So you do want to cut out that little circle back there that has to do with getting this up over top of that dowel. So what I'm going to do is start by cutting all the way around, and you can try to pin this in place. I'm just holding it with my finger. And then depending on the shade of leather you've picked, okay, lay that down, and I'm going to try to mark that. So I've got a little pen here, and that works really well actually. So I'm just drawing that on, so you can see that's marked that really well, and I'll just cut that out with a really small pair of scissors. And to cut these out, just take a little pair of scissors with a nice sharp tip to get in there and do your best to cut that out. Remember, this is going to be on the bottom of the doll, so you're actually not going to see it. First thing you're going to do is actually put these on the bottom of the foot. We're going to go over top of that, and then we're just going to glue it in place, but I'm just going to glue it down this center a bit. It's just to keep it from shifting around, because we are going to be sewing around the edges. Okay, and then the next piece would be this part, which I call it the boot toe. That's going to go around like this. So in the end, you're going to be sewing these together around that toe. So I'm going to come around to the back. See that? Line that up. A little bit of glue along there. And same with this other side. Don't worry if they don't quite come together, or even if they overlap a little bit. Okay, and then this will all come together once you start sewing around. The leather will stretch a bit for you. And then the next thing, I like to kind of do it at the same time, is I've got, this is kind of the back, what do I call this piece? The boot outer. So this kind of goes, You're going to want to take your boot tongue and kind of start it up where that, so what we'll do is we'll put a bit of glue in along here. Keep that from flapping around on us. Okay, and then next comes your tongue. You don't have to go all the way up with glue, just do a little bit at that bottom, and that gets centered side to side, a little bit overlap onto this front part, and then you're going to come in with the boot outer. You're going to find the center back of that, and that you're going to match up with the center back here. And I like to put some glue down there to hold that in place. Okay. And then around here, I will add a little bit at the sides of glue, but I don't want to overdo it because I am going to be stitching, and that this really comes together once you start stitching. These are just to kind of keep the pieces from shifting around on you. It's nice to just throw a little bit of glue in there so it's easier for sewing, okay? So that's sort of the main part. So what I'm going to do now is I just use a Gutermann thread. So I like to start where all of these come together. So you've got your sole, your boot upper and outer, and I like to pull a stitch there just to hide my knot. And now I'm going to come down and sew this sole, and I'm already having a little bit of problems, so I'm just going to take my needle nose pliers and sew through. So you can see I'm just coming up around the last little bit here to stitch. You wanted more of a rounded toe too. You could have gone in here as well with a bit of stuffing to raise that up. I'm going to go with the flat look. Okay, and your last stitch, you're going to tie it off. So the only other thing then for this boot that you need to do is the laces. The laces are what bring all of this together and give it a little bit of shape around the side. You can use probably 3 or 4 strands of embroidery floss if you wanted to. You can also use I'm going to use a crochet thread and take a nice over generously long piece. I'm not going to try to tell you how to do the laces. I know I do mine in a little bit of a weird way, but it works for me. It takes 2 needles, and I just eyeball this. You could mark where you want to come in and out with your thread. That's totally fine. But I like to start out through both of those and then try to get both sides sort of even. Okay, and then I'm just going to go ahead and put a pin on or a needle on this side. It's just the fastest way of doing this. So I basically just take turns, one on either side, pulling it through. Okay, I'm just going to do one more stitch on each side just to bring me up to that top corner. Okay, so straighten out that tongue, and I like to come through with my needle and just pull these tight. And I'm just going to shorten these a bit so that it's a little bit easier to work, but I generally just tie a bow on these, and I'll double tie off after. So I'm going to tie it and do a knot to start so that stays nice and tight in a boot shape. And now I'm going to do just a conventional bow. Pull that a little closer, and then you can trim up these little pieces here. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up the other boot. And then the next step we'll work on is the shirt. All right, so we've got both those shoes are now done and ready. And the next step is moving on to the shirt. And I'm just going to talk you through these patterns a little bit. So you've got 2 options for the puff sleeve. There's a large puff and a small puff. And to show you the difference, the large puff sleeve has a bit more area in there, so it is puffier, versus the original design is just a smaller sleeve there. So you can decide what you think will work better with the outfit. I'm going to go with the large puff because I love it. All right, so I've kind of fussed a little bit with my pattern pieces, but I've got them on here. So I'm going to go ahead and cut all these pieces out. All right, and on these pattern pieces, because I'm using a darker fabric, I'm going to just use a pencil crayon in a lighter color to mark these tick marks on the sleeves. Okay, and you're also going to want to mark front and back on both sides. Make sure that you're flipping it, because these are different profiles, these sleeves. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is take my rear shirt and I'm going to sew the center back seam. Okay, and then you're going to open that up and you're going to take your two shirt fronts and with the right sides facing, face them like that, and you're going to match these shoulders up and we're going to sew along each of those shoulder seams. Okay, and then next you're going to open that up. So remember, this is the back and this is the front. So you're going to take your sleeves and they're going to go in like that on each of those sides. So you've got the F matching up with the front that opens. This is your back piece and this is going with that front. So with these ones, what you're going to do is you've got these tick marks because you're going to be gathering between these to create that nice puffy sleeve. So I'm going to take you to the machine and I'm going to do a stitch. So I want to make sure that I've got a couple of strands there to help me with gathering afterwards, so that I've got something at that end. And I'm going to come in, and this is just the sleeve on its own, and between this tick mark and this far tick mark down here, I'm going to sew maybe like 1/8 of an inch to the edge. And don't go back on yourself, just keep going straight, and you'll see why, because you want to be able to gather this. I'm going to end at that other tick mark. I'm going to lift up my needle and I'm going to pull this out, and then I'm going to cut this so that I have some length to work with. Okay, because essentially what you're going to be doing is you can take these, and sometimes you'll have one that's stuck. There you go. See how it starts to gather around there? So that's what you'll do. And it's easier when you've got a string to pull. You'll find which one pulls nicer for you. So that's kind of how you're creating your puff sleeve on that. So I'm going to go ahead and still have that length there. I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Lift it and pull out. Okay, so now make sure you're picking the right one for the right side. So again, I'm matching this edge as the front. I got the F there. So I can go ahead, put the right sides together. And this is where I like to pin. Again, if you're more comfortable, you absolutely can baste everything in place. I'm just going to use pins there and then where that first notch is. And then I'm going to go back over to this other side and do the same thing. I'm going to pin at the corner and where the first notch is. And then I've got my shoulder there, and I still need to fit all this fabric in there. So I'm going to pull these a little tighter to get a few more gathers in there. Don't pull too hard, and if you're pulling it's not coming on you, try one of the other strands. Just keep going until you've got kind of the same length as your matching fabric. If you see where you had that mark, you could even line that up. All right, so I'm just going to go over to the machine and sew all the way through here, and I'm going to be removing the pins as I go. Okay, so again, you can see how nice puffy that sleeve has gotten. So we're going to flip it back so that you're working on the wrong side, and I'm going to flip this up and stitch it to hide that raw edge. All right, and then match those outside seams. You could throw where those two seams come together. That could be another spot that you put a pin like that. You'll be starting up at this end to sew it. So you'll be sewing this side seam. All right, so I've sewn my other sleeve, and the last thing to do is to go around this entire raw edge and just finish the seam, finish the edge. So I'm just going to come over here. It's flapped over about 1/4 of an inch. When I get down here, I just kind of flip it over as well as I can. All right, so now we're going to pull it right side out on both of the sleeves. Okay, so you want to make sure this is fitting nicely all the way around. This is where you want to come in, cut off any additional bits of thread that might get in your way. And then afterwards, we're going to be coming in and closing this. So the next thing here is I'm going to put those mittens on, the little hands. So this is the hand fur pattern. You're going to need 4 pieces. So you've got your hand fur cut. You're just going to be facing them with the right sides together. And you're going to go to the sewing machine and stitch all the way around 1/4 inch. All right, and the easiest way to turn these hands out is with turning tubes, but I don't have my turning tubes up here, so I'm going to try using my hemostats, see if I can grab it at one end and kind of push it through. There you go. So then these literally just go right over top. So you want to make sure that they bottom out. So pull them up, and when you feel it come to the end, you just want to double check that it feels like it actually is at the end. If you have trouble with getting them on, if you didn't sew, like if the hand's a bit big for them, you can use like pliers to try to get them on, the hemostats. You could try resewing them a little bigger. And so then these ones you're going to want to glue them in position. You could also stitch them just with a whip stitch. Okay, and now you can roll these back down. Now what I didn't tell you is you could also add some trim to the shirt around the edge. So yeah, so even now you could glue some trim on, but if you'd wanted, like on this bunny, I've got this bit of trim there. This one, I didn't put any trim on either. It's up to you how you want to do that. Trim is optional. With the shirt, I am going to show you how I sew it shut so that the seam's not visible. I'm going to come in underneath, and I want to go over top of that kind of messy area. So I'm going to go in and kind of feel for where that shirt ends. You can see it coming up on me, which is perfect. But see, I'm working along that seam line that is already there. And I'm just going to come down. I'm going to do a small loop right over top of that seam line. Then I'm going to bring my needle down quite a bit further. See, I can move this, so I'm not attaching myself to the body by any means. And then I'm going to pull this through slowly, so you can't really see. It's kind of hiding my stitch by sneaking it in behind like that. So now I can start pulling these out. Okay, so I'm just going to finish this. I'm going to sew this down, and I'm going to see what other little bits I have for adornment, and then I'll come back to you. It might make the most sense if I go around and figure out what kind of collar I want to put on her. I think I like it like that, maybe, to finish that one off. And so I'm just going to sew it along the bottom. I'm going to hand stitch it in place there. And once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and this gives me an idea of like where I want to start those buttons. So I don't have to go all the way down the shirt, because all the way down the shirt is not going to be visible once the skirt goes in. So I might just do 3 buttons spaced like that. Okay, so I'm going to end up carefully sewing a button in each of those spots. Other ideas are that you can also, if you got lots of lace trim, if you don't want to sew buttons, this would look also quite nice if you were to do one side like that, and then the other side like that. So if you had that coming up, so you could sew that in place. So here we are so far. I've got the buttons sewn on, and I've sewn this little bit of lace around the bunny's neck. And yeah, and then we finished her boots. So the next step is the skirt. I have included 2 options for the skirt. I might include a third one. We'll see if I get it done. The first and the easiest one is the one I'm going to show you first. So it is essentially just a gathered skirt. So this actually, I've got 2 layers on this particular bunny because it's such a thin fabric, you can see through it a bit, and I wanted to create that. So I did a double layer there, which is why it's so puffy up here. And you just end up gathering it around the waist. So that's the same style we're going to do for this bunny. So basically I've got my piece of fabric cut, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to start by sewing along this seam, and then I'm going to follow up and turn that under a 1/4 inch and do a hem around the top and around the bottom. All right, so you can see that I've gone ahead and I've sewn all the way around the seam. I've done the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to turn this right side out. And before I put it over top of the bunny's legs, I'm just going to pick one end to be the top. I'll just go with this one. And I've got a long piece of thread. And I'm just going to start up here and just do a running stitch, because afterwards that's what we're going to use to gather this into a skirt. I find this pattern works very well with thinner fabrics. So basically nothing heavier than a standard kind of cotton. The reason being, these gathers will get very, with thicker fabrics, you'll really notice them get bigger around her waist. So I'm going to leave that all attached with my long thread coming off of it. And I'm just going to scooch this bunny through. Okay, and decide where you want that to sit. I'm going to go down out there. And you see your little boots are hanging out there. Okay, so then we're going to just gather this. Those gathers around. So now I'm going to come back here. I'm just going to kind of pull that as tight as I can and just knot it off. Too close to that. So I'm just going to adjust these gathers around. This is what we have so far, and I am very happy with that. And this particular fabric, it's like a linen, you don't see through it, so that worked out really well. All right, so next I wanted to show you a couple of other skirt options that you have. These patterns, I just kind of finalized them, so they won't be as rough looking when you get them, but one of them, this one, they're both constructed the same way. And I'll just show you quickly on this bunny. This is that fitted skirt that is done with the 4 panels, and then afterwards you'll be coming in and just sewing up that little bit in the waist. So that gives you a more streamlined look. And then one I'm just finishing up now. This one has a bit of a swoop at the end. It's a little more fitted through the hip. So this is kind of my first crack at it. But you can see how it, I don't know if you can tell in the video, but like it comes down, it kind of has this nice fullness in the bottom. Okay, so I've got the fabric that I want to work with. Again, it's one that doesn't have any stretch to it. And we need to cut 4 panels. So I am just folding these. These have just been ironed. Okay, and so you want to just line up that pattern piece. Top. I'm just going to pin this in place for cutting. All right, and I'm just going to cut all 4 layers at once. If that's too much for you and your scissors, just do 2 at a time. Okay, so I've got my 2 doubled over panels, and with this fabric, I don't need to bother really pinning it. Just make sure that you're nicely lined up. And I'm going to start by making my 1/4 inch seam down this first panel. All right, and we're going to do the same on this panel set. And then the next step after this, I do like to iron these open so that I really get that curve pressed out, and it's easier to do it as you go than waiting till you're done the whole thing. So I'm going to take this to the iron. All right, and you want to make sure that you are nicely pressed all along the seam. So I'm going to do the same to this piece. Okay, because you can kind of see it starting to cup and make this bit of a curve in there for the hips, which is perfect. So next you're going to take both these pieces together, and we're going to do our 3rd seam, and that'll be matching all along here and sewing it along this one side. Okay, and then again, you're going to want to press out that new seam. Okay, so we have kind of like this. When I go back and press, I'll fix that little bit in there. So at this point, I'm going to look for any extra threads that I don't want hanging around. And now I like to go ahead and I'm going to go around and I'm going to just press the seam to one side, or you can open it as you go. That's up to you. But you can go around now and turn it under a 1/4 inch and sew around that that waistband. Okay, and once you've done that, we're going to come around to the bottom. And this, you can see that we have, it's not perfect where these come together. So you can either kind of round that out with a pencil and then cut it, or when you come around here, just don't worry that that's a little bit taller. Okay, you just go ahead and sew your 1/4 inch seam, knowing that that's just because you got your 2 points coming together. Okay, so I've sewn all around this bottom part, and I've kind of tried to keep that curvature as well as I can. So now, in order for this skirt to be able to make it over her hips, because it is quite fitted in this area, I'm going to measure 1 inch down here. Okay, and make a mark, and I'll do the same on the other side. And this is part that you won't sew, that'll be hand sewn after. So what we're going to do is just in that area, fold this over your 1/4 inch and press it just along there. And you'll see afterwards why we do that. That's to help you hand sew that seam so it looks nice after this is on the bunny. So next we're going to flip this out, and you're going to be sewing your last seam here, but you're going to be starting at that tick mark and continue on down to the bottom here. Okay, and then cut off any extra threads. So you can see I've got this part has not been sewn and I've got it pressed there for that'll help us afterwards for assembly. And I'm just going to cut this little bit of extra fabric off of there. And other than that, that looks pretty good. So the last thing now that you've got to do is for that last seam that we just did, that one also needs to be pressed out so you can continue getting this nice shape. Okay, and then I'm just going to grab a random bunny body I've got flying around. Let me just see how this is going to fit. Okay, so this sneaks over those hips. You may have to squish in a little bit more to get it around. Okay, and you can see you end up with more of an A-line kind of look to it. All right, and this would look good. You just want to center that one of these panels. So we'll just do this panel will be centered over. And when you come back here, in order to close that, I'll just show you quickly, even though she doesn't have a shirt on yet. And I've got this quite high up because I'm going to like that look when I put a shirt on her. But I'll just show you with a random piece of thread because I'll take this out afterwards and do a shirt for her first. But so you've got these folded over, those have been pressed. So I'm just going to come in behind there to hide that knot. And then you're going to match this with this, and you would normally be using a thread that matched your fabric. And I'm just going to come in and do a really tiny whip stitch down there. Okay, and so that's hopefully minimized, and you can see how nicely that skirt flares out, and it kind of cups a little bit here. So that's just another version, and the way that you did this is the exact same way that you do the looser paneled skirt. Okay, and again, this one, see, I've ironed that, but I haven't shut it yet because I haven't made a shirt yet for this one. So those are just some other skirts that you can do for the bunny. And then also, this is a version of it that I'm working on where I actually did a slip. So she's also got her bloomers, but now she's got a slip that's cut from this same paneled skirt, and I just shortened it up a bit more so I knew that it would be underneath where the skirt came. And I did the skirt out of this really pretty lacy fabric that I had. Alrighty, so moving on to the sweater. This is just it's not a fancy sweater, and so think about whether or not you want to do it, because depending on what style of bunny you're doing, this kind of a sweater may not complete the look. A shawl is one way that I like to do my kind of fancier looking ones. So I've got here a piece of knit fabric, and I've got my pattern pieces here, and I'm just going to see how they all fit. So you definitely want your stretch and your knit to go across the figure. So I am positioning these as such. I got that one flipped just so that I can use up that corner. And this one is the back of the sweater is cut on the fold. I'm just going to cut these pieces out. And when I'm working with knits on my machine, everyone's machine is going to behave differently. I find I just leave the tension where it is, and sometimes I do increase the stitch length a bit. If that's not working for you, if you find that it's gumming up on the back, then you may need to switch to a needle that's meant to sew knits, and or switch to a setting on your machine that's more of like a stretch stitch. The sweater is also not designed to really have any, it's meant to be kind of like raw at the edges to make it look a little primitive. So just keep that in mind. If you want to, you could add a seam, or you could add a hem. So I'm just going to lay them and match up so that my right sides are facing. I'm going to match up those shoulder seams on both sides, and I'm going to stitch across my 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, and so then we're just going to take that, fold it open like this, and I'm just going to take note of where the front is on these sleeves. So the front's over here, So I'm going to take this one and flip it out that way, and this one like that, okay? And then for this one, I'm just going to roughly find the middle. And the reason why I do this is because this is a knit. If it starts to stretch and do its thing as I'm sewing, I just know that when I get up to this point, I need to make some adjustments. I think I'll show you at the machine a little bit more of what I mean by that. So I'm just going to stick that one on there. So I've got that place held. And on this one, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, so I have my machine, and I have increased my stitch to a 3, if that means anything to you. So I'm just going to match these corners. Just go a little slow, go back a little. And I'm just going to try to keep my eye and make sure that so my bottom piece needs to stretch a bit in order to match the top. And sometimes I come back here and I help it a little bit with the knits. Remember, when we get up to this, that's about your halfway point. I'm just going to stop there. And I've got this much left. I need to match up to this corner. So I'm just going to start and find that corner and hold down with my finger. And then I'm going to stretch this fabric out. Okay, so you end up with something like that. So you will notice that the one side, there's a lot more that I'm trying to squish in there. So you really do have to pull it. Okay, so we've got those two sewn. So the last thing on this one is we're going to flip. We're still working on the back side. We're just going to match that seam there. And the other two we can probably pretty much stretch and find them. And you're going to do the same to this side. Okay, and then we're basically going to sew this whole bottom area. And if you've decided that you're going to do the larger puff sleeve on the shirt for the bunny, I would only do the sweater if I was doing the smaller sleeve. Try it on this one so you can see how that's looking. Okay, and so if you wanted to, again, you could come in and stitch that around. If you wanted to, you could also lengthen the pattern and have the sweater come down longer, okay? And you can change the length of the sleeves on it. You could even style her so that the sleeves are rolled up a bit, something like that. All right, so that's just to give you an idea. This bunny, though, because I did do the nice puff on it, I'm not going to use this sweater on her, so I'm going to hang on to it, though, because I might use it on a different bunny. Okay, so I've got a couple options here to show you for something you could put over her shoulders instead of a sweater. If you wanted, you also don't have to put anything over her shoulders. So again, I've used this in another bunny before. It's this fabric. I thought it would be cool to cut along its pattern. And what's nice is it doesn't really, like, this is the back side, but it's still quite attractive. And so you could do something like this where you sort of just put it over the bunny's shoulders and have it coming down, that sort of a thing. Could even turn it into a bit of a scarf, depending on what look you're going for. And the other option I have, and I'm actually going to try this on this bunny, and I'm just curious to see how this might look if I took a wider piece and had it coming down around on her shoulders, kind of like that. All right, but that just gives you a few ideas there. I'm going to decide on how I'm going to finish these bunnies with these sorts of things after I start to work on some hats with you. And the other thing I need to show you is the base. So the base for the bunnies, this is one that's completed. And I find this size, I've got several of them, these boards. This size works really well. So and all you want to do is I don't have it printed out right now, but in your pattern, there will be a hole placement guide, and this is a 1/4 inch drill hole because that is what these dowels are. So you can see that once this is all done. Now this you can sand and make it much nicer. You could also cut it with a proper tool. I just used my wire cutters because that's what I had. But these will slide in there. You may have to make some adjustments in terms of how long that dowel is coming out. See, mine are coming out a little bit too far, so I'm going to probably trim that a little bit. You see how nicely her feet sit on there. And I like to locate her so she's basically, once her feet go on, there's like an equal distance between the back and the front. Okay, so that's that you can play around with. And then once I get my holes in there, I like to stain it. This is just a walnut stain that I used. And that just makes it look a little more rustic and nice. So I'll tend to like pre-do a bunch of these even for my Santas. All right, the next thing I want to show you is a variation on the shirt. So this one has the puff sleeves, but you see this little inset that I've created in there. You've got a pattern for that. So I'm going to show you how to work with that. I'm going to do the sample. So you're going to need your front shirt pattern, your rear shirt pattern. I'm going to do the large puff sleeve because it's my favorite. And there's this little piece. I haven't named it yet, but it'll be the front shirt inset. What we're going to do is I'm going to work with this as my main fabric. All right, so the first thing you need to note is in order to have it finish like this, you're going to be doing your seam at the back rather than the shirt coming together in the front and having buttons. So in order to have that look, you need to take your front shirt pattern, a printout of it, and we're just going to cut off that seam allowance there because that will no longer be needed. And then you're going to fold your fabric. This will now become a fold line along here. And position that pattern piece along there, and we'll just be cutting it out. So this will become a single. Okay, then we'll come down and this will come back to center back. You're just going to cut the same as you would normally, only this time that back, we're not going to sew the center back. We're going to leave that open until the very end. Okay, so I've got my pieces here. Center back we'll just put aside for now, and we're going to focus on this front shirt. So what you've got is now it's got a single piece, and so this little inset, you're going to cut it of a complementary color or whatever you'd like, and this one will end up being overlaid. So I'm going to use this plain white fabric that I have with a bit of a pattern on it. I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you can on this side. This just has a really light floral print on it, and you only need to cut one of these. And to do this option, you are going to need some sort of a ribbon or a cording, go around this edge, or use an interesting stitch on your machine because it is a raw edge. So you're going to then simply place this right over top and matching everything as you can. And I'm just going to throw one pin in there. And I'm going to do a stitch as close as I can to this edge all the way around the perimeter just to hold this in place. All right, so as you can see, I have the front now where I'm just going to show you what that looks like at the machine. I've got my trim here. Bring it over a little bit. And I'm just going to go a little bit past this edge just so that I know that it's going to be covered. And I can already start stitching through that. Okay, and I'm just going to do my best to come along. Again, you could hand stitch this. I want to try to machine stitch it. Okay, so I've got that half done. And I kind of like it how this little, these loops are kind of lining along there. I think that's quite pretty. So I'm just going to cut this one. I'm going to cut it just straight up and down like that. And then I'm just going to take this particular one. It doesn't really have a right and a wrong side, so I'm just going to flip it over. And do the same thing on this side. This would actually look pretty cool if I were to continue that along there. All right, so then I'm going to cut this again straight up and down. And I'm going to throw just a short stitch this direction to kind of hold those together. All right, so I have something like that happening. All right, and now it's pretty straightforward. I am just gonna trim this up a little, match that. And now we're gonna take the back pieces, and much like you've done on the other shirt, only this time it's the back that's in two pieces. And I'm just gonna start by sewing across those shoulder seams. And now going back to sleeve, I'm going to make sure I did not put these markings on yet. So I'm just going to do that now. On this one, I'm going to show you something also different. What we'll do, because the last blouse that we did didn't have any trim along this bottom, so we'll put some trim on this one. So I'm going to start by just hemming up that lower edge. Okay, and then what would make sense on this, since I've got that lace that I was using along here on this shirt, I should probably just try to use that same one there, so it really matches. So I could go right over top if I wanted. I could have it extend a little bit. I could have it up even higher for some interest. I think I'm just going to have it go across and just have it peek along that edge so that you get a little bit of a scallop look. Okay, so you'll see that I've got these both done with the trim on them, the arms, and I've gone ahead and I've done my stitching for gathering along the top. So I'm just going to go ahead and get these puff sleeves put onto the shirt. It's the same method as we did in the previous blouse. So I'm going to do that, and I'll come back to you and I'll show you how we finish off the rest of this. Okay, so you can see I've sewn both sides, side seams, and now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start at one of these bottom edges and sew all the way around and up in here to finish those edges. Okay, so I finished all around this edge, and now I'm ready to turn the shirt right side out. Okay, you want to come around and make sure that that puff sleeve is nicely pulled out, and that's how that's looking. I'm not worrying about this edge because I'm going to cover over that. Okay, so I've got another bunny body, and let's see how this is looking. So I'm going to go ahead and put this on. Keep in mind I still have to put the hands on this bunny. You can kind of get an idea of how this is going to look. And I haven't done bloomers yet either. Okay, but it's that sort of an idea. And then when I come back here, because I've got such a dark color, I can easily hide my thread. But when you go to sew this, you can also, I believe I did it on the other pattern where I just matched my stitch along here. So I took the same color thread and basically kind of hand stitched through this back in order to close it off. Okay. So at this point, I think I've shown you a couple of variations on the shirts, 3 different skirt options that you can mix and match. So now we're going to move on to 3 different ways of doing hats. These beautiful rice papers that I got from Ninny's Napkins is the name of the small shop, and she's located in Creemore, Ontario. And I love these. So I'm going to look at, even though this particular bunny's not done yet, I think that she would look really good with a hat made out of those nice blues. So I'm going to start with that. So I'm going to start with the hat. This is the hat brim. And all you're going to do here is you're going to start by cutting this outer circle, and I'm going to come in and just cut this inner one for now. Just ignore those other lines on there for the moment. So now I'm going to come here and trace this onto the cardboard, and then this inside circle. And then I'm going to take this piece and I'm going to ignore those lines because that's just to show you kind of what we're going to be doing. I'm going to cut this out along this inside circle. Okay. And then I'm going to place this back over and match it as well as I can with my previous line. And now I'm going to draw this other circle. Oops. So now I get my cardboard scissors and I'm gonna cut around the brim. Okay, and then you might need a sharper pair. I'm just gonna cut this inside circle. I'm just gonna get this started in here. And then I'm gonna go ahead with this is just a sharp pair of Fisker spring-loaded scissors, but just a scissor that will cut straight to the point with cardboard is all that you really need. And I'm gonna cut those tick marks. You don't want to cut past that other line. And these will end up getting folded up. There's something for the hat band to be able to be kind of stuck to. So, okay. And this one's your shortest hat band. So I'll go back to these smaller pieces of cardboard. So now I'm going to take my hat band piece for the first hat and line it up. And at the same time, I can cut the hat top. So next, I like to just use masking tape for this. I'm going to get a piece of masking tape ready, and I'm going to take my hat band and I'm going to match. I'm not overlapping, I'm just meeting those two ends nicely lined up. And then this will get positioned over top of this circle. And for this one, I think I'm going to come this way and just use some small pieces of tape to hold that in place. You could also come around and use your glue gun to stick that together. So you can see I'm just coming along here and putting a piece of tape. Okay, when you're happy you've got that nicely secured in there, and then you got the top part of the hat, and this will rest in there. There's a cut it here. This is the hat that will tilt on the bunny hat. So that is for one ear to go through. You'll see how that works a little bit later. So it's designed just to be the perfect size circle to fit on top of that hat band. And I'm just going to do my best to line it up. Okay, so that's looking really good. So the next step is you're going to take some Mod Podge. You can use glossy if you want. I've got matte that I'm working with. And I'm going to grab my rice paper and I'm going to cut a smaller section to work with. And this, you can either cut it or you can tear it. You get like kind of some natural looks when you tear it, but I'm just going to kind of get an idea how big I need on that top. And I'll show you how we do this. I'll put some down. And then I'm going to pick my straight edge, actually, line that right up against. We're just going to go around so to do these edges. And I like the rice paper because it's so thin that that Mod Podge can soak right through. I'm pretty generous with how much I chuck in there. And go back if it's starting to lift on you a little bit. It's okay if it crinkles over. And if it's not sticky, it means you just need to get some right underneath it. And so yeah, I'm just kind of working my way around that hat. You're also going to be doing this part as well. You don't need to do inside of this one because that won't be visible, but the brim, the underneath the brim will be. All right, so you can see I have finished this hat. I'm just going to take off some excess Mod Podge. All right, and then I've done the underside and I've ended, that's all going to be covered up, but this looks great. So I am going to put this aside to dry, let it dry thoroughly. It may have softened up a little bit, the cardboard, while you were working, but it'll come back for you. For drying, I just like to lean it against something so it's not going to stick to my tabletop. All right, so I just wanted to come back and show you, this is what the base of our hat looks like. This is for the tilted hat version. And so what's really nice now is what I like to do is I've got usually some dried flowers flying around, and you can they can be quite delicate, but you can preserve them a bit by spraying them with I'll link it in the video notes below or in the description. It's like a spray lacquer. So this, and again, this bunny is still a little bit under construction. I've got ones at all different stages, but kind of a sassy bunny look. Okay, so you can angle the ear how you want and adjust this head, but it would go something like this, I would say. And I'm just going to turn that ear a bit forward, and yeah, so that is the tilted hat. you would end up gluing this, or I don't think you can't really stitch it in place. So yeah, this would have to be glued on. But then you can think on the top what kind of adornments, like if this is how this hat is sitting, you know, maybe you want to put a dried flower there. You can also use, there's these kinds of flowers. I got them at the thrift store, but do you remember these? These are like those, they're done with ribbons and stuff. So even, you know, a couple of those on the hat will look good. You could do a hat band out of some ribbon. I don't have the right color size, but you know, something like that you would go around with a thinner ribbon. Or you could add beads. You can add some like little found objects too on the hat, like really so many things. So this is a very elegant style of hat that you can have for the bunnies. Just cutting out the hat brim, tracing it onto some cardboard. Oops, I missed a spot. Of course I did. Okay, and then once you do that, you're just going to cut off just this circle. And same on this side. Okay, and then that looks good. I'm going to trace this side and this side. Okay, we can go ahead and cut this out. All right, and you're keeping this flange, I'm going to call it, there. And you're just going to cut out this inner part. Okay, and then just like with the tilted hat, you're just going to make some ticks right up to that line. Okay, and we're going to fold that back. There you go. So now you're going to take the hat sides, and I'm actually going to pre-roll this around. So I got this old Mod Podge tube that I can kind of give it some curvature to it. Once you do that, then you can grab your tape, and this one will get taped, again, meeting up those two sides best as you can. You want to come in here and throw in some more bends, depending on how your cardboard's behaving. Give it a nice circular shape. And now this will fit over top of those tabs, much like the other hat, and you're just going to do the same thing to attach those two together. And once you're happy with that, come back up here and again try to work on that curvature, get it as round as you can. And then I forgot already to cut this piece out, but this is the hat top. And then for the hat top, really the best way is to just tape it down, because there is nowhere really to put glue for that one. All right. And this hat, I'll go ahead and decoupage this like the other hat, and then we'll put that on one of the bunnies. Okay, and now that the hat's dry, I just want to show you quickly how you put it on the bunny's head. So you can see the shorter side where these two cutouts are further to the front, that's the front. So you're going to just wiggle these ears through these openings at the side. And my hat's still might be a little wet still, but it's not going to wreck anything. I just want to show you this. There we go. So you can see how that comes on, just like that. And again, this is one that you'll want to glue into place all around. And again, you can add some interesting adornments on this hat as well. And you can like move the ears how you want to. If you move the ears out and down, you don't actually have to glue the hat on, because it holds. Even if you push these out and then up, that would also kind of hold your hat into place. So it all depends on the look that you're going for. So that is, oh, and something else is when you're working with these papers, I've also done something where I've cut out, you know, these butterflies and actually just decoupage them on there. So I may go back and do that with some of these butterflies to make this hat really pop. Okay, so I guess that's it for this particular tutorial of doing the clothing for the Belle Époque bunny. So you can see there's a lot of different things you can do with this pattern. I've got a whole bunch of these started, all at different stages. But yeah, so, and then there's the two versions of hat. And yeah, so I really hope that you have fun picking away at this. The final tutorial is going to be probably a shorter one, and it's going to be about things that you may want to adorn them with. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. And if you're looking to start your Belle Époque bunnies, the pattern and instructions are below for download. Thank you for joining me today and have a great day.